Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Katie Doherty, the President and CEO of the Kennebec Valley Chamber, and thank you for joining us for our weekly Chamber Connect sponsored by Central Maine Power. Today's webinar, we are joined by Commissioner Heather Johnson. She is the Commissioner of the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. Today, she will give us an update from her department and answer some questions. Commissioner Johnson is charged with overseeing more than 24 experts across several bureaus whose mission is to help communities and business prosper through a variety of programs that provide everything from targeted tax relief to community block grants to tourism marketing. Commissioner Johnson has more than 25 years of experience in both the private and public realms. Of course, with COVID now, her role with her and her team is to provide the checklist and the guidelines on the reopening. First off, I would like to thank Commissioner Johnson for taking her time this morning to hear from our members and to answer some questions. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Commissioner Johnson. Let me unmute you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, you got it. Thank you. Thanks everyone for your time. I know everybody's incredibly busy right now. I thought I'd just take a couple of minutes to talk through the economic restart plan, where we're at, what the next steps look like, and then spend most of our time on Q&A, because that's usually the most valuable thing for folks, right, is to really try to get into the questions that you specifically have, and then give you as much information as we have. Certainly you may have questions that we don't have answers to right now, and if that's the case, we'll try to capture them and get feedback back as that information becomes available. So I guess 3 weeks ago now, the governor launched the Restart the Economy plan. We got a lot of feedback on, we need to have a vision. We'd like to know kind of what to start planning for. And as you look at what other states around the country are doing, we're trying to take information, right? If you think about what other states are doing, what the data says, what local business needs are, and then what the healthcare numbers are, and put those things together to try to create this vision forward. And so we've created these stages, and the federal government has a phased plan as well. I think almost every state has a staged plan, because there's some real risks to doing everything at once. And so we've got to be able to isolate challenges as they potentially come up. And we learn from protocols every day. You know, we've adjusted some of the checklists that have been out there to be more relevant to the situation. Even though businesses have looked at them, healthcare experts have looked at them, we've been involved in looking at them as well. When you actually put it into practice, sometimes, right, you learn what works and what doesn't work, or what has unintended consequences. And so we can tweak and adjust those as we go. We make adjustments to those checklists once a week. We don't want to have a lot of churn on those, so we collect information, review that information, and then make updates every Wednesday. And so today, you will see a number of checklists get posted. Some of them are new checklists that will lead us into stage 2. Some of them are adjustments of old checklists. And when we adjust old checklists, there will be clear sections that show what's been changed, and they will be dated so that people know, do you have the most current one? What is that? We are also setting up a system so that we can actually push out checklists to people that have downloaded it, so that as people put in their email address with the download, we can push those out to people to try to, again, create as much transparency and as much communication as possible so that people have the information that they need. In phase 1, stage 1, we added a rural layer, which hopefully supported some of the work that you all are doing. We have, as you know, 12 counties that do not have community transmission, and that allowed for additional expansion in those counties. The 4 counties with community transmission have fewer things in stage 1 because of the community transmission elements and the amount of traffic that adding additional openings causes. So yesterday we pulled campgrounds for Maine residents forward for Memorial Weekend in an attempt to try to let Maine people move fairly safely around the state. Campgrounds were ready and prepared and had a lot of engagement in the checklist development. We believe they have good protocols in place and are prepared. So that piece was available. Obviously, on the flip side of that. We are starting to see early indicators of some concern in a couple of sectors. And so we have temporarily delayed a couple of openings while we review additional data that's becoming available now. Again, that doesn't mean that they won't open quickly. It just means there's clear data that says there's a reason to reevaluate, and that's what we're doing. So that's what we did yesterday. Today, summer camp guidance will go up. I know that's on a lot of people's radar to try to figure out. Childcare has never been closed by the state, but a lot of childcare providers did close. As more and more businesses open, that childcare capacity has been a little bit of a challenge for folks. So we are seeing more and more childcare facilities start to open as more people go back to work. Summer camps, like I said, the guidance will be posted today. And that, I think that will potentially be a helpful solution for people as well. Overnight camps are a different category. So day camps and overnight camps have different sets of guidance. Tourism is probably the other big question or big discussion that we have on a regular basis. We go from 1.3 million people in the summer to 10 million people in the summer, in July and August, 16 million if you add May, June, July, and August together. So that is work that is actively ongoing. We, are working with a number of work streams on how do you protect Maine residents, protect tourists, and protect the tourism economy and create capacity in that tourism economy. And I would say there's more work to be done there for sure, but that's work underway. If you look at our neighbors, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island are all kind of in a similar situation to where we are right now. And we are trying to work closely with them because that's where the bulk of our tourism comes from, to try to figure out, is there alignment we can get? Are there safety protocols that we can feel comfortable with, even if they're not going to open? And so we are actively working through that now. So with that, Katie, maybe to go right to questions.
Yep.
I saw one of them pop up on my chat for overnight camps. Overnight camp guidance, I believe, is going to get posted today as well. Is that right, Kate? Okay. Overnight guidance will get posted today as well for overnight camps.
Perfect. So we had some questions that got sent in ahead of time as well.
Yeah.
So one of the questions was, is dance studios, gymnast, or karate places the same as gyms, or is that different?
We have that in a different category. We have a youth sports category.
Okay.
That guidance will get posted today as well. And youth, I will say, the data is evolving as this virus relates to youth, right? Initially, there wasn't much concern about kids and the impact for children. I think we're seeing different pockets of concern now, but youth sports guidance will go up today. It is much more about guidance and less more about you cannot do this or you can do this, because I think it's evolving a lot, and there are so many different types of sports. Like, is karate the same as basketball, the same as baseball, right? I think the healthcare team would say baseball is the safest. Basketball is probably the least safe, right? Because it's so personal, right? there's so much physical contact, as opposed to baseball. There isn't that same physical contact, and there's a lot more distance. And so, we are going to put out guidance and make it transparent for families and coaches and anyone else to try to see.
Okay. Another question is from Michelle Pelletier, the president of Performance Food Service North Center. She says, Heather, thank you for making the time to be on the call today. Given the length of time businesses have been shut down and not generating revenue, we will clearly see a shortfall in state revenue, let alone the millions of dollars that won't be pouring into the state from a normal tourism season. How does and when does the governor plan to address the budget shortfall?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's certainly something that is being looked at and discussed a number of ways, but I don't have a good answer for you on that one. We'll have to get back to you.
Okay. Another question about the 14-day quarantine. The 14-day quarantine rule on out-of-state visitors is having a devastating impact on the hospitality industry, which we know impacts many more businesses than just restaurants and hotels. What progress has been made to reduce or eliminate the 14-day quarantine on the out-of-staters, so when we can get we can salvage some of the summer of 2020 for our businesses and depend on that money.
Yeah, I think that is the number one piece of work that kind of we're all working on right now to try to solve for. My guess is there won't be one answer to that question, but multiple layered answers to that question. If you think about overnight guests versus day tripper guests versus rural guests versus densely populated tourism markets. Right before this, reason I was a couple of minutes late for this is we had the town managers of these densely populated tourism beach markets on a call talking about, what do traffic patterns look like? What roads might they want to close? How could they do some of these things? What support do they need from an enforcement perspective? All of those pieces, right? There is a town component to this as well that we are kind of actively working through. So I would say if you think about layers like testing potentially, and Iceland is maybe a really good market. Hawaii is doing some of the same thing, right? It's easy if you're Iceland because everybody comes on a plane, and when they land, right, they are, if you land in Iceland, you are tested. You quarantine for the first 24 hours while they run your test, and then assuming your test is fine, you have kind of free reign for as long as you want to stay or not stay. If you test positive, then they have an isolation program. So that is a model that is a tourism economy that looks similar to ours, right? They have a very small population. They really balloon with tourism, and tourism is a critical part of their economy, just like us. So that's a model that we're looking at to try to say, what can we, what are they going to do and how are they going to do it? Hawaii, very similar, is taking a similar approach. Again, in Hawaii, if you man the airports, right, you catch everybody coming through. Our model is a little bit different. We are looking at kind of layers of how and where can you create safety nets to make sure that people are captured and are protected. And I feel like we are making good progress. I know that is not helpful to the business community, right? They need a final answer, and we aren't quite there yet.
Another question is, do we have to wait for the guidance on the youth and the overnight summer camps to come out later today, or can we discuss it a little bit now?
We can discuss it. Let me pull it. I'm just going to exit you full screen and try to pull it up so that I can tell you what. Do you have specific questions?
Yeah, Nate, Rudy, do you have specific questions with that? You put that question in. I can unmute him real quick. That might be quicker than doing the chat. All right, Nate, you are unmuted.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you, Commissioner, for your time. I need to know whether it's feasible for us to open a summer day camp in Hollywood. A lot of people would like to use it, but is it safe? And what protocols do we need to put in place to make it safe? I'm trying to accommodate the families that depend on this care, but I also don't want to create an epicenter for disease transmission among our children in Hollowell. We're just not really sure what to do and how to approach it.
Yeah, so I can give you some of the general thinking, Nate, and then after this, I can send you the draft. It won't be final, and you'll still have to log in because you have to log into a test that you have it, but you can't do that until later. But I can send you the draft. It really looks at kind of spacing of children, how to prioritize outdoor activities, and food and food service are some of the big pieces, right? Like, how do you feed the students or the children? Where do you feed them? What kind of groupings do you have, and how do you keep them from, intermingling too much, right? I think common sense says you can't keep kids apart from each other for more than a couple of minutes at a time. It just isn't going to happen. But if you have if you have kids together, can you keep the same 10 kids moving through stations together so that even though more than 10 kids are there, that group of 10, right, isn't creating cross-contamination around the other groups of 10. And again, trying to limit the risk and isolate the risk. And those are the goals, right? Could you do, again, like volleyball instead of basketball, things like that to try to get to a safer level, right? What happens when you use craft equipment, right? Can the same kids have the same craft tools, paintbrushes, those types of things, so that there isn't that cross-contamination. That's what you'll see in these checklists. It's not about should you or shouldn't you necessarily. It's about kind of these gradations of how do you get to the safest possible solution, knowing that everything we open creates additional risk, right? There's no sure answer to some of this. We recognize anything we do has some risk in this moment.
He put in the chat, thank you. Our Board of Health doctors are calling the grouping bubbles. So if there are 50 people at a camp, they stay in the same groups of 5 or 10 to reduce transmission.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Will testing be available for incoming youth campers coming to the state for overnight camps?
We are working on that, but we don't have a final solution at this point. And again, I think some of it will depend on the camp's decisions on what they want to have for testing or not testing or symptom checking, and what is useful and what isn't useful. There's a lot of discussion about parents of these children, right? If they're coming in from out of state to bring their kid to a week camp, what do the parents need to do? So there's lots of guidance in that document around those types of things, right? Could it just be one parent that drops the child off instead of both parents? Lots of little suggestions and multiple pieces to get to a broader answer.
Can you please clarify if out-of-staters arrive, may they quarantine with other out-of-state guests at the same time?
If they're family.
If they travel in together.
Yeah, if they travel in together, they can quarantine together.
Can you give us an update about outside venues for concerts or people with big acreage? Can they do some kind of outside performance?
So that's one that's on the docket right now that we're trying to figure out, right? If outside activity is safer, which the early science says that is, then does that create additional flexibility to do, weddings have been the primary thing, right, that are coming up in these gatherings of, people, brides and grooms that want to have weddings or of larger than 50. So that's maybe where most of that work is happening right now, but we have opened a dialogue with a number of live venues to try to think that through a little bit. The inherent congregation of that work is a core element of one of the key challenges of this virus. And so there's some concern there but there may be some options there as well.
Right. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. You guys are a quiet group this morning. And I have gone through the questions that were sent ahead of time. Does anybody have other questions they would like to put in the chat for Commissioner Johnson? Oh, let's see.
Limit of 50 per venue. What?
Is the limit of 50 per venue, such as churches, applied to each meeting space with separate entrances or by premise?
So right now it's separate spaces. So if you have separate entrances and separate rooms, then those would be separate. And again, 50 people per that area, right? Room with separate exit, assuming they can social distance. So you couldn't cram 50 people into a really small room, but 50 people, assuming they can social distance, would be one set. I know a lot of restaurants are talking about 50 people inside, 50 people outside. You can do that kind of work. And again, you've got to make sure that the traffic flow is managed in a way that people aren't kind of coming into contact with each other.
So can you talk a little bit more about the outdoor dining options and kind of the clarifications with that?
Yeah, so we are encouraging communities to look at their outdoor dining guidelines, and we are working with Bablo on outdoor dining guidelines to try to think about how do we make this as easy as possible for restaurants to add capacity outside, because if their inside capacity is going to be limited and outside is a little bit safer, how do we help them add capacity outside to help balance? And so that work is going on, and we are moving that forward. So we should have more there shortly.
Can you give us an update of what impact the IDEX testing capacity has on the ability to test more residents?
Yeah, so the IDEX testing capacity was a really critical element to moving this rural package forward. Before the IDEX testing capacity, we could only test a really, really small portion of people. Even symptomatic people weren't being tested unless they were hospitalized or at really high risk. Now, right, we can test, we've taken multiple tiers off the top of that. If you think about testing as a pyramid, we've taken multiple tiers out of the top of that pyramid and said, you know what, if you're asymptomatic but have close contact, if you're certain other categories, now we have testing capacity. What that allows us to do is quickly react to any potential flare-ups as they happen and really quickly try to isolate those situations so that it doesn't create broad spread. Spread can happen really quickly, and so the faster we can react, the better. Again, so that's testing, and it's also about contact tracing. We're getting a lot of questions about kind of the request for restaurants to hold some type of contact information, a first name, and either an email or a phone number for people that are eating there. That is absolutely about isolating problems and getting information to people quickly, and therefore trying to reduce the spread.
Apologies if you discussed this, but how will seating be impacted at events like weddings? Will there be a need to be 6 feet between individual guests?
Yes, we haven't issued wedding guidance yet. We will issue large gathering guidance today, and that will be kind of the precursor to that. So it looks at kind of how do you create the appropriate distancing, how do you create walking pathways, because this face-to-face work is where you get escalation. If everybody's going in the same direction and distance, it's a little bit safer. So there are a lot of nuances to that. And so that guidance will be posted today, and will be the base for some of these other larger outdoor events.
Do you know when the wedding guidance will be updated, or is that just with the outdoor events?
It's coming. Yeah, we recognize that. The reason we don't have it yet is we are continuing to try to evaluate some outdoor capacity options, and trying to find some creative solutions there. But I saw the chat. Yeah, definitely recognize that it is that season, and we want to get that done as quickly as possible.
In light of the cases of COVID related to the Maine Veterans Home Project in Augusta, are changes or new enforcements of social distancing rules being implemented of construction sites?
So we will post some guidance for construction sites today as part of the posting of work. We had never posted specific guidance for industries that were already operating as part of the essential work before we moved into the restart plan. Lots of construction companies have asked for that in the last week or so, and so we will post that today. Again, pretty common sense things, right? How do you keep people as safe as possible while working kind of in confined spaces? What kind of PPE does that would that require? What processes should be changed? What are there temperature checks as people come in the morning? Those types of things. So that guidance will get posted today.
Can you talk a little bit about the 14-day quarantine and how it's being enforced? If somebody checks in a hotel, how are the hotels doing it? Or if somebody out of state shows up at a restaurant, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so from a hotel perspective, that would be starting in July. And so we are actively kind of working on enforcement now at multiple levels, right? How do we help? Most of the front end of it will be educational, right? Because there are a lot of layers to this work. And so some businesses are like, there's too much information. We need some help with that. And so the first response is always going to be educational, right? Our job right now is to try to help people be safe and to try to help businesses operate in the best capacity that they can. And so that will be the front end. Certainly there will be points in time that we have to do more enforcement type work. And we are working on an enforcement plan for that. What I will say right now is we are getting lots of calls, right, on situations in different arenas. A lot of them are not incredibly accurate once you actually do some research. So I think there's a lot of fear and a lot of concern, and we are actively kind of working in each of these cases to figure out how do we create the right environment, what kind of educational, what kind of communication do we need to have in different sectors, and how do we help both consumers and businesses kind of work their way into this new mode of operating, because it's a change for all of us, right? And we can help consumers be part of the solution, and they have done a great job of that so far, so we'll continue down that path as well.
With those rules, will there be specific rules of requirement of single occupancy in hotels for business travel, such as construction crews?
I don't know the construction checklist off the top of my head. I do know we had to sign a number of waivers for construction crews to expand numbers of rooms because they wanted to separate out their people. I'll hesitate on going further than that. I'm not sure if that's in the checklist or not.
Let's see. Is there a sample attestation that out-of-state guests can sign to clarify that they have met the 14-day quarantine when they arrive at our lodging establishments?
There are a couple of other states that are doing that, just the self-attestation. I can't even say that word. So we are looking at that, we are looking at that right now as one of the choices. Again, I think there will be multiple levels to this tourism piece. And I'm not trying to be vague about it. I just think there are lots of pieces that we're trying to put together here, and it will all come to a head fairly quickly with multiple streams of work going on that will start to move into a package that y'all can review shortly.
Another question I got sent to me was, why can't a person come from out of state of Maine to stay for a few days in isolation in a private vacation rental setting with no shared common or public space, be supplied with restaurant food or groceries by delivery, and then get into their vehicle and leave the state, especially since the 14-day quarantine out-of-staters can leave isolation to grocery shop?
Yeah, so so there are just a lot of quarantine questions, and I'm gonna just group them all together right now and say, I think we'll be back with some clarity around all of this in the next few days. So I don't want to create more confusion in the attempt to create clarity. I think if we just put it all together, it will be easier. So
Sounds
I'll
good.
get back to you on that one, Katie.
A final question, is it currently legal for guests to be temperature checked prior to checking in?
So that's an interesting question, and we have 3 different lawyers looking at that to try to make sure that that's the case. And other states are doing that for a variety of activities, not just check-in at hotels, but to be on streets and to do other things. So we'll have to get back to you on a final answer on that, but it is being reviewed.
Perfect. I don't see any other questions. Heather, do you just want to mention where people can submit questions to you guys or sign up for your weekly call-ins or your newsletter, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so we have Kate. I'm deferring to Kate here for a second. The weekly call, I think you register on Facebook. Kate, do you want to unmute and answer this one? Oh, Katie's got to unmute you. Sorry.
Okay, there we go. That's fine. Yeah, so you can register via the DECD Facebook page, or there's also a link to register on the DECD webpage. They're weekly from 3:30 to 4:30. Once you register the first time, you don't have to keep re-registering every week. You can just log in. So there's that way that's how you can get into these webinars.
Perfect. And what's the email address people can email to submit questions if they have questions for guidelines?
You could email, there's a couple different ways. If you have questions specific for the webinar, you can email me. So kate.foy@maine.gov. If you have questions around guidelines, you can either email me or you can email our business answers email address, which is business.answers@maine.gov.
Great, thank you. We have one final question that popped in. We have an ex-employees that are still struggling with accessing unemployment office. Any update on that?
So I think I don't have a good DOL update. I know they are now able to take a lot more calls than they were being able to take. So I think calls are getting returned very quickly now, or getting answered much more quickly. So I would encourage people to try again at it. If that doesn't work, I know the online system is significantly faster. But I don't have a better DOL update than that.
Yep, perfect. So with that, we will let you go a little bit earlier than planned, which I'm sure you could use those extra minutes.
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate your time and the thoughtful questions. You know, we continue to make progress and keep moving forward and try to balance this, you know, physical health with economic health, and we will keep moving forward. So thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson, and thank you to all your team for everything that you've done. I would like to invite everybody for our next Chamber Connect next Wednesday. The May 27th is with Andrew Silsby and Craig Garofalo from Kennebec Savings Bank to talk about how to make sure your PPP is forgiven. So if you got your PPP, that's a great one to tune in to make sure you do follow all the guidelines that you need in place to get that forgiven. And tomorrow at 4:30, we'll be having a virtual after hours. So join us and connect with all of you. We miss you guys, so it'll be nice to virtually connect. Please check our website for any resources that you might need. And thank you again to to CMP for our sponsor today. I hope you guys all have a great day, and thank you so much.